Joining me now in Penang, Malaysia is Mageswari Sangaralingam. She's a research officer at Friends of the Earth Malaysia, an independent non-profit organization. And in Northampton in the UK is Simon Ellin. He's the chief executive of the Recycling Association. I thank you both for joining us. Mageswari, let's begin with you. Big picture, after decades of trying, is our global recycling system failing?
Yeah, in terms of the import of plastic waste, we found that there was a hike in imports into Malaysia after China imposed a ban of household plastic waste imports into their country in January 2018. So we saw a spike of a lot of plastic waste was being imported into Malaysia, and we found that it was contaminated plastic waste, which some of it could not be recycled. And what happened was all this residual waste was left in the open dumps, and some of it got burnt, and this also created a lot of environmental pollution and also health impacts to communities.
Mageswari, tell me the difference. So firstly, who's sending this contaminated plastic waste to Malaysia? And tell me the difference between ordinary plastic waste and contaminated plastic waste.
Okay, in terms of plastic waste, which could be easily recycled, it would be clean plastics and also homogeneous. It's like just certain type of plastics. But once it is contaminated, it means it's dirty and also mixed plastics. So that is very difficult. And then there's also low-grade value plastics, which has no value for the recyclers. So this ends up as residual waste.
Are there any countries that are particularly bad at this?
In terms of the hike in imports, we found that US was one of the top countries which were exporting plastic waste to Malaysia.
I see. So Simon, we see that the Chinese decided and shocked everybody by saying we're no longer taking all of this, and the other countries have been filling that gap. And now we're seeing these countries push some of this back and say, sorry, we're not taking this because this is contaminated. Is it a global crisis?
No, not at all. Far from being a global crisis. I think we need to put it in context, and I would never sit here and pretend that it doesn't happen. I think that illegal shipments of plastics and other materials are the exception as opposed to the rule. I think the vast majority of exporting is compliant, but undoubtedly there are those operating on the periphery that are illegally exporting, and those are the ones that we need to clamp down on. And I would applaud Malaysia and any other country that receives material that's not compliant, that you send it back. But it's not a crisis in terms of illegal shipments. I think we maybe have a bit of a getting towards a crisis in terms of world markets and availability of markets, but no, certainly in terms of shipping contaminated material, no, it's not a crisis.
So, Mageswari, what we're hearing from Simon is that we need to think of the big picture and put it in context, and perhaps in terms of a business model, this is just the world readjusting to the Chinese opting out of this market, no more, no less. What's your response to that?
So in terms of after China imposed the ban, what we found was Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia found that a lot of waste was coming into our countries. And then in mid-2018, these three countries imposed the ban, restrictions of imports of plastic waste. But what happened next was the exporters were looking for some other countries to export their waste, and actually, Turkey was one of the destinations for the exporters. And then later on, India also imposed a ban. So now the recyclers have to look for some other areas to send their waste. And what we have heard from some recyclers in US, so they could not ship out their waste. What they are doing is they will have to handle the waste themselves in their own countries. And in Malaysia, the Malaysian government and the customs they found that there is also exporters who are falsely declaring the waste that they are sending to recipient countries.
How are they falsely declaring it?
So in terms of the, because you would have to have an HS code for scrap plastics. So that is 3915. So they declare it as something else. And also some of the waste which are also mixed. So that's why under the Basel Convention, during the meeting in May, um, about 187 countries are party to the Basel. So they decided that there should be strict enforcement, and also in terms of you need to get consent from the recipient countries if it is going to be dirty and contaminated waste which is being sent.
Mageswari,
So
do you want
it is,
so do you want stricter enforcement, or do you want stronger, newer regulations?
there are already regulations imposed by the recipient countries. Like, for instance, Malaysia says they will only accept clean and homogeneous plastics, and also the ability for the importers to recycle whatever plastic that is being brought in. So in 2018, some of the approved permits that were given out to importers, there were too many approved permits, and they did not check the capacity of the factories to process it. So if it is clean and homogeneous and the country is accepting it, then probably you do not have to clean the plastics. It just goes into the processing plants.
Okay.
So you have to regulate. Yeah.
Right. So Simon, would you agree that in the collection and the processing and the sorting and so on in the source countries, especially the Western countries, people need to do better, and perhaps the whole process needs to be more smoothly regulated so people don't pull a fast one and dump bad waste onto Southeast Asian countries?
I do. I agree with that, because I think what we mustn't escape from is that plastics and recycling plastics is a very valuable resource. It's very circular in its nature. It is a non-renewable fossil fuel. It is a finite resource, and we don't want to lose the material. So we do need to find, we do need to recycle it, and we do need good practices. But I do agree that we need to regulate it a bit better, and the proposed changes to the Basel Convention, whereby you will no longer be able to ship certain types of plastics, mixed plastics, in the current form, that you will actually need notification, a much more sort of careful scrutiny to it. I do agree that is the way forward, but I think that what we need to be looking at is looking at plastics as a resource, and we need to look at the whole supply chain of how we can improve things. We need to be producing less of the material. Although plastic is a fantastic material, fantastic packaging material, has many applications, is circular, is recyclable, is a valuable resource. Do we need to produce as much, and are there alternatives? Are there more environmentally alternatives? Such, for example, switching to fibre and to paper and to other materials. And I think to do that requires a full supply chain approach, not just, for example, all the stuff that's happening in the UK, which I can cover later, but what's happening globally as well. We need to align everything, and we need incentives out there, to allow us to be better recyclers.
And so, Mageswari, a lot of individuals will be watching this and they'll be asking, well, what can I do? Because people have already made a leap, or they've taken a leap where they feel good about themselves after putting something in a recycle bin, right? And they feel, okay, well, I've played my part. Yeah. I've done my part. But now you're telling me that there's still this whole other big mess after all of this, that this is not even getting recycled because people are screwing up along the process, along the way. So what can individuals do to make this whole thing better?
Well, I think that,
okay, Simon, go ahead. You answer that, and then Mageswari after that. Go ahead, Simon. Yes. I
think we need to put this in context. Is that most of the materials that are recycled, go in the recycling bin, that are supposed to be recycled, will be recycled. The problem that we have, and we have this, it's a huge problem in the UK, is that we're producing far too much of the material. It's very, very complicated. Even I, as an alleged expert, sometimes struggle in my own bin to say, can this or can this not be recycled? Because it's often a fusion of different polymers. There's different layers of it. It's food contaminated. It's the wrong colour, and it's incredibly confusing. And very importantly as well, it's not labelled, so the public don't know what to do. And what we're advocating, it's now happening in the UK, is that we're actually starting right at the top of the supply chain. So we're saying to the producer, we're introducing the polluter pays principle. So you've got to produce less, and what you do produce must be designed for recyclability, and if you don't design it for recyclability, then you're going to pay an awful lot of money through what we call extended producer responsibility. When we've got to that stage and we're actually producing materials that we can recycle, we've then got to label them so that you and I as the public will go to our recycling bin and we'll look on the bottom of the container and it will say recyclable, put it in your blue bin or whatever the colour might be. That can then go to the materials processing facility. We've got the technology to separate, sort, bale and produce very, very good quality commodities, and we've then got an application in a global marketplace. Whereas at the moment, you know, we're producing too much, a lot of it's unrecyclable, the public don't know how to do it, they haven't got the appropriate facilities. The materials recovery facilities are producing the best material that they can, but often it's not good enough. And, you know, often with the widespread confusion, you know, some of it ends up in the likes of Malaysia, and Malaysia saying, sorry, you know, this isn't the material that we want, you know, it's not good enough.
Mageswari, does that sound like a better plan to you?
Yeah, I agree with Simon, because we are also looking into getting consumers to use less plastics, and also for producers to redesign their products, and also in terms of packaging and delivery systems, so that, you know, at least we can eliminate the use of single-use plastics. Yeah, because these are some of the very low-grade value plastics which are used for packaging. So if we can have a different or a better alternative, then that is what we should look into. And there are also already many countries which are imposing bans on single-use plastics. So this is what we are calling for, and for consumers and also producers to break free from plastics. That is our call for everyone.
Okay. Well, I'm often accused of talking rubbish on this program. This is the first time that is 100% accurate, and I fully accept it. Mageswari Sangaralingam and Simon Ellin, I thank you both for joining us on the Newsmakers.